Is James Gunn making a Superman film or a Justice League movie? Yesterday he was talking about Anthony Carrigan playing Metamorpho. And Metamorpho sounds like a very exciting character. We've researched him on this channel before and we've talked about who and what Metamorpho is. Sounds like a very interesting character. And if this is a Justice League movie, you're thinking, wow, Guy Gardner, Metamorpho, the engineer, etc., etc., etc. There's a lot of DC characters in this film. Now, I don't think there's anything wrong with having a living, breathing DC universe in a Superman film if they're in the background, but I don't think they are. We are talking about these DC characters playing a huge supporting role. And that's why I think it would have made more sense to call this and make this a Justice League movie. I think a Justice League movie as the first entry point for the DCU would have been a really good idea instead of it being a Superman film again. Because I think a Superman movie has limited appeal. And Superman's my number one superhero, my number one character in fiction. Superman 17 was the first movie I ever saw and loved it. That's why I fell in love with film, and stories and everything else. So I love Superman. Superman is everything to me. He appeals to me. But we're talking about mass appeal here. And the Justice League movie as the first entry point to the DCU would have had more mass appeal. That's just my opinion. Because this is a Superman film and there's a lot of DC characters. As I've already said, these are not just going to be cameos. They're playing supporting roles. Every time you focus on Guy Gardner or Metamorpho or the engineer, you're not focusing on Superman. And we have a very literal-minded general audience today. If you call a film Superman, they expect it to focus totally on Superman. Now, I pretty much understand. I've read between the lines. I know what this film's going to be. And most people do. It's not rocket science. It's a reverse Kingdom Come story, which means you're going to have all these DC characters probably already as part of a Justice League, but they're not exactly doing things in the right way. They're not kind of keeping the world safe in the right way. So Superman becomes a huge inspiration to become better for them. By the way, you still could have done a storyline like this in a Justice League movie, which makes absolute more sense, because then you've got a justification why all these characters are in this film. So as I say, it's cool that you've got a living, breathing DC universe in a Superman film, but it's better if it's a Justice League film rather than a Superman film, because this is not an origin Superman film. So this makes more sense to make it a Justice League film. And then, of course, you've got to have Batman. We don't know if Batman doesn't play a part in this film. There's going to be a lot more other DC characters we don't know about. And here's the problem. As soon as critics get their hands on this movie, they're going to call it overstuffed. They called one of my favourite Batman movies of all time, Batman Returns, overstuffed. And that had what? 3 or 4 extra characters. It was ridiculous. I think Batman Returns is a much better Batman movie than The Dark Knight. Don't kill me. That's just my opinion. You're entitled to yours. That's mine. And so I think this is where Gunn's going to find it very troublesome. So just because people are calling it overstuffed, it doesn't mean they won't also enjoy the movie, but it's going to be a criticism. Now, I've said before that maybe Gunn doesn't have the confidence in Superman as a character to lead a film on his own. And this could be partially the reason why there's so many supporting DC characters in this film. Now, I think we've all seen that you can do a great standalone Superman movie and it's there, but some people don't have that belief in the character. So he may be using this reverse Kingdom Come story because he doesn't believe in the character of Superman. It's something that people will have to ask him. I don't think he would answer that question honestly. He can't admit that he doesn't have much faith in Superman as a character on his own. But it's certainly about, Superman being a nice guy and maybe these other heroes not being so nice and being more flawed than Superman is, and using that, in terms of an arc for a Superman film. But I think if we examine that, and I think it's very important to examine that, it's going to give him problems. People will react negatively to all these characters being in this film. Because as I say, there's a lot of characters in this film. And you have to ask the question, what are you giving us here? A start-up Justice League story or a Superman story? To me, it looks like a start-up Justice League story. And I think it would have been better in the guise of a Justice League movie. Even if Superman's more front and center than a normal Justice League story, I think it works better than calling this a Superman story. It could be this is why this film's called Superman Legacy. Of course, he could kill Superman and then he could be an inspiration for the Justice League going forward. We simply don't know what he's up to, but I think this is kind of the guise of the film. You know, that Superman is going to inspire these other metahumans, these other DC characters. Now, I don't know if they're in a ready-made Justice League already, but that's what he's attempting to set up here. So I think, I think they were afraid of calling this a Justice League movie because Zack Snyder's Justice League was so huge and so epic and so fantastic and wonderful. A Justice League movie so quick after that would be a hard act to follow. But, Superman's been around in the DCEU, and I think that Man of Steel is a hard act to follow as well. So it's going to be interesting where we're going with this. But yeah, I think that at the end of the day, this should have been a Justice League film rather than a solo Superman film. And I think with the amount of DC characters that are going to be in this film and some that we don't even know about yet, I think he's going to find it very problematic to convince people this is a Superman film. Because people have been watching Superman solo films all their lives. Superman, Superman 2, Superman 3, Superman 4, Superman Returns, Man of Steel. They're proper, genuine solo stories. Those writers and directors had to make a solo Superman story, and that's very, very challenging, but mostly they pulled it off. And I mean, different opinions will say that they didn't. Different people will say that they didn't pull it off. Well, they tried their best and they worked with the tools that they had at the end of the day. And James Gunn's going with the Marvel approach, where you take a solo film and you have lots of different kind of characters from that universe in that solo film as well. So that's why in the first 3 phases, the solo movies were making so much more than the solo DCEU movies, because they were cheating in a way. And this is what James Gunn is attempting to do. So it's kind of interesting if this really brings more mass appeal. Personally, I don't know how many people are going to go and watch a DC movie or a Superman movie because Metamorpho's in it, or Guy Gardner. I mean, Guy Gardner's probably quite a big pull. The Lanterns should be. But it's, this is a difficult sell for the public, and this is going to be very interesting. Variety recently, making an article about how these superhero films just don't make bank anymore. Joker Folie en Doigt being the latest of a long line of failures, and even the ones that make a little bit of money are not making the money to justify their huge budgets. And so when you look at what Gunn's attempting to do here, it could be a brilliant, colourful movie, but people will ask the question, is this truly a Superman film? We've got Lex Luthor, there's some inspiration from All-Star Superman, from Kingdom Come, from different things. So there's a lot of Superman going to be in this movie, but could it also work as a Justice League movie? I suspect so. I think we're a bit blind right now about this film until we see the trailer. Hopefully that's coming in December. I think obviously the trailer is important because it will tell us a lot more than we know right now. We're all intrigued. All us geeks and nerds are intrigued about this movie right now. And so I want to move away from that subject. I do believe people will accuse this Superman film of being a Justice League film. But Quinton Tarantino has taken a dive into the Joker Folie en Doigt conversation. And he said he really liked it, especially the musical elements. And he went further. This is Quinton Tarantino. I've spoken to Quinton on a couple of occasions at some events. And he's so passionate about film. You can't, honestly, right? I'm not even exaggerating. You can't shut the guy up, especially when you get him started on Superman. But anyway, he said, actually, director Todd Phillips is the Joker here. He's giving the finger to the comic book nerds and the studio. And the comic book superhero genre in general. I've spoken about this before. The reality is These auteurs like Tarantino and Phillips hate the fact that comic book movies have taken over cinema, that comic book nerds are dictating what goes into cinema. And I think that Tarantino is right here. I think this movie was a middle finger to the studios for embracing the comic book genre so much, and to comic book fans for dictating what goes on the big screen. And I think Tarantino has read the situation beautifully. But I enjoyed Joker Following Dwyer. I thought it was a really good movie. I thought it was a cultured, beautiful musical, continuing the strands from the first film, but it wasn't what the audience wanted to see.